Roll call.
Melton. Pauls. Palermo. Festerson. Gray. Harding is absent. Mr. President.
Here, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for opening remarks by Council Member Ben Gray.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Let me just take this off just for a second. As many of you all know, there have been all kinds of concerns and issues, especially related to race and racism in our community. And this coming Saturday, there's going to be a march to address the concerns of an individual who was arrested in 1970. His name is Ed Poindexter, who was accused of the bomb death of a police officer under highly questionable circumstances. This is something that I had done a show on a number of times when I was doing my television show. But there's going to be a march this coming Saturday at 4 o'clock. They're going to meet at Coons Park, end at Coons Park, and I would encourage people, first of all, to be peaceful. Secondly, to listen to what some of the people who are going to be speaking have to say. And this may be an opportunity, maybe one or just a few opportunities for people to come together, both the community and police, to finally solve at least this issue that has been dragging on for over 40 years. So I would encourage people, first of all, to be peaceful, and secondly, please listen to what's being said, because there are some questions, and this individual is very sick in the penitentiary, and what most people want is for him to come home and be able to pass away at home. So hopefully we can get that done, and hopefully you all will listen and pay attention. Thank you.
An affidavit of publication is on file for the pre-council and city council meeting, and a current copy of the Open Meeting Act is posted in a white binder on the east wall of the legislative chambers.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this meeting of the Omaha City Council. We thank you for joining us today. As a courtesy to those in attendance and to facilitate the conduct of our business, we ask that you turn off or silence all electronic devices. Madam Clerk.
We have a proclamation.
Councilmember Melton, you're recognized.
Thank you. And we have a proclamation here for Chuck Segerson, and I know his wife Liz and son Andrew are here. Do you want to come down to the podium? For those of you in the audience that were unaware, Chuck Segerson passed away last week. He obviously was my predecessor for District 7 here on the City Council, and I'm going to read a proclamation that kind of talks a little bit about how much Chuck did for Omaha and our council and our entire community. So I've got a proclamation here. Whereas Charles Chuck Segerson Jr. was born in 1945 to Jean and Charles Sr. in Pennsylvania. Whereas Mr. Segerson honorably served his country as a sergeant in the Air Force, and while stationed in England, he met Elizabeth A. Moss, whom he married in 1967. Whereas Chuck was devoted to his family, a father to Anthea and Andrew, and a loving grandfather to 6 grandchildren and 1 great-grandchild. And whereas after being stationed, Chuck came back and went to UNO to obtain his degree in business, and then began his career as a State Farm insurance agent in 1974. Charles maintained his practice at 108th and Fort for 35 years until his retirement. And whereas Chuck has a long history of serving his community, he was an Eagle Scout, a Mason, a Shriner, and held leadership positions in the Omaha Cosmopolitan Club, Omaha Rotary Club, Boy Scouts, Nebraska chapter of the American Diabetes Association, Camp Floyd Rogers, Keystone Little League, and volunteered with several more local and neighborhood associations. And whereas Chuck's passion for politics was forged when he volunteered for the Lee Terry campaign for Congress in 1976, Chuck went on to hold leadership positions in the campaign for Hal Dobb and to serve 2 different terms as the chair for the Douglas County Republicans. Chuck was elected as chairman of the Nebraska Republican Party in 1995 and served on the Republican National Committee from 1995 to 2001. Chuck rounded out his political career by serving as an Omaha City Council member and Omaha City Council president between 2001 and 2010. Chuck was recognized as a living legend by the Nebraska GOP in 2010 and was placed in the Nebraska GOP Hall of Fame in 2013. And now, therefore, be it resolved that the Omaha City Council extends their sincere condolences to the family of Chuck Segerson and honors him for his countless contributions to the city of Omaha, his devotion to fostering a passionate interest in Nebraska politics for new generations of leaders. And we're declaring Tuesday, September 15th, 2020 as Charles Chuck Willard Segerson Jr. Day. In witness thereof, we have put our official seal on this proclamation, and I'll present it to you, the family.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I know I just wanted to say a few words, and I think Councilman Festerson, I know, wanted to say a few words. I didn't have the honor and pleasure of being able to serve with Chuck on the council, but I did have the honor and pleasure of trying to fill his shoes, and those are some shoes to fill. I still, when I'm out and around, people still ask me, how's Chuck? And they have stories about how Chuck helped them put a stoplight at an intersection, multiple ones. I think that he did that at least 3 that I've heard of, that he's worked really hard to get stoplights put in, helped them with park issues, neighborhood issues, and everybody told me he was always available and he always called everyone back. He was a great servant to people of District 7, and I know no one's going to forget him. In fact, people in Keystone, which is no longer in District 7 anymore, but I have to tell you, the neighbors in Keystone that I still talk to today, just thought the world of Chuck and how much work he did for that neighborhood, not just as a council member, but even in the volunteer efforts and things that he did for the neighborhood. So I just want to thank you. Chuck will be sorely missed, I know, but he was just such a wonderful man and just dedicated so much. So thank you for sharing him with us, Liz and Andrew, all those years, because I know there was a lot of time away from the house, and probably when you were growing up, because I know that happens to me today too. But
I just went with him. That's
you
how I just went with him.
just wouldn't let him. But I want to thank you and tell you how sorry we are. But Chuck will never be forgotten down here at the Omaha City Council. I know our chief of staff, I don't know where Jim is, but there have been a lot of people that have been around that got to work with Chuck for a really long time, and our heart goes out to you.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Melton. Councilmember Gray, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, thank you all for sharing Chuck with us. I had an opportunity to work with him for a little while we were both on the city council. But my best times with Chuck were when I was in the newsroom working at Channel 7. Anytime I knew that we had to go out and do an interview over on 108th and Fort where his offices were, Chuck would call or I would call, but most of the time Chuck would call. He said, "Are you going to send Ben Gray? Because I got an issue that I want to debate with him." And so we had a lot of fun together. He's one of those individuals that no matter which party you are, this was an individual, this was a man that was respectful of everyone and who did his best to serve this city. And I enjoyed all of the debates that I had with Chuck. Some I won, some I lost, but I enjoyed the time with him. He's going to be sorely missed, but I, like Councilmember Melton, thank you for sharing Chuck with us for all those years.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Gray. Councilmember Festerson, you're recognized.
Thanks, Mr. President, and thank you to the family for being here. Nice to see you again here at City Hall, and I wanted to express my condolences as well, and I appreciated the conversation we had just before the meeting here. I worked with Chuck for several years too, initially when I worked in the mayor's office and he was on the city council, and he was one of the deans of the city council at the time, and certainly was when we were first elected in 2010. I think there's 3 of us still on the council from his time as a colleague of ours. And I think one of the lasting legacies there with Chuck and with Mayor Fahey, and then I think in subsequent city councils, is we really brought civility back to City Hall together. And that's, I think, a trait that's very much needed in all governments right now, and maybe especially local government as we work through our many challenges together. And he was very effective in that respect and well respected by all of us, and a great colleague to have in that respect. We didn't always agree, but when we always worked together to figure out the tough issues we were dealing with at the time, and I always very much respected him for that. It was shocking to all of us in 2010 when we lost him on the city council, and he was missed. But we forged on, and we'll keep forging on in his memory and appreciate his public service.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Festerson. Councilmember Pauls, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I knew Chuck in a different direction, not on the city council. We were both Shriners and Masons. And in the good old days, to become a Mason, you had to memorize a little book, and it was in Old English. It was difficult. He and I are going through it together, and he is just regurgitating this stuff. I said, how can this guy be doing this? I'm having a hard time just getting it out in just what I call plain English, but it was Old English. But he did. He was really, I was really impressed with his intellect. It really amazed me. Like I said, we both went through it, but he did it much easier than I did. I struggled, and he was just going right along. And of course, there's Shriners, and I don't know, for those of you they have fun, but they do an awful lot of good things for children. And that's how I remember him, in a totally different way other than sitting around up here. And my experiences with him were quite pleasant.
Thank you.
I thank you.
And I would just add briefly, I came onto the council just sadly just about 6 months before he got sick, and my memories of Chuck were just his warm, gracious welcome to me, to welcome me onto the city council, and to show me around, and to make himself available if I had any questions, to see how anything worked. And he gave me a little insight as to which of the offices were best climate controlled and which ones I did not want to request. The other thing I'll remember is it came as a surprise to me that when he did have his stroke, that there were some news media that were asking about, well, how long are you going to basically let this go on? And I said, the charter said he gets 6 months, and he's earned every one of those days as far as I'm concerned. And that's the last I want to hear of that. And that, among other council members saying the same thing, to me, that was the least that the city and the city council could do for him, given the years of service and sacrifice he made to the city and your family has made. And those are just a couple things I wanted to add. And he will be missed. He was a force. He was a force for all these things that you've heard about. And your loss, I'm sure, is profound. And our condolences.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Is there
Thank
anything
you
you
so
want to
much.
add, or?
No, he really loved the city. He just really loved it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk.
Item 6, an application to consider a Class IB liquor license for Blackstone Meatball located at 18101 Chicago Street, Bay 101.
The public hearing on item 6 begins at this time. Are there any proponents?
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. President, members of the council. Sean Kelly, 2804 South 87th Avenue, appearing on behalf of the applicant, and happy to answer any questions.
Are there any other proponents? Are there any opponents? The public hearing is closed. Second, roll call.
Melton. Pauls. Palermo. Festerson. Gray. Mr. President.
Yes.
Motion passed 6-0. Item 7, an application to consider a Class I liquor license for Chipotle Mexican Grill 26-335 located at 808 North 102nd Street.
Public hearing on item 7 begins at this time. Are there any proponents?
Mr. President, council members, Ryan Rickey, 409 South 17th Street, here on behalf of the applicant, Chipotle Mexican Grill. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any other proponents? Are there any opponents? The public hearing is closed. Roll call.
Melton. Pauls. Palermo. Festerson. Gray. Mr. President,
Yes.
motion passed 6-0. Item 8, an application to consider a Class I liquor license for Easy Cuts Barber Shop located at 1018 Northwest Radial Highway with a waiver of City Council Liquor Rule 7.
The public hearing on item 8 begins at this time. Are there any proponents?
Hi, I'm Jaleesa Jefferson. I'm the applicant for Easy Cuts Barbershop. Address 6407 Whitmore.
Thank you. Are there any other proponents? Are there any opponents? The public hearing is closed.
With the waiver.
Roll call.
Melton. Pauls. Palermo. Festerson. Gray. Mr. President,
Yes.
motion passed 6-0. Item 9, an application to consider a Class I liquor license for Tanner's Bar and Grill located at 17330 West Center Road, number 102.
The public hearing on item 9 begins at this time. Are there any proponents?
Mr. President, members of the council, Sean Kelly, 2804 South 87th Avenue, appearing on behalf of the applicant. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Are there any other proponents? Are there any opponents? The public hearing is closed. Roll call.
Melton. Pauls. Palermo. Festerson. Gray. Mr. President,
Yes.
motion passed 6-0. Item 10, an application to consider a Class D liquor license for NP Mart 10 located at 4420 L Street.
The public hearing on item 10 begins at this time. Are there any proponents?
Mr. President, members of the council, Sean Kelly, 2804 South 87th Avenue. This is an upgrade from a Class B to a Class D, but will remain a convenience store. Happy to answer any other questions.
Thank you. Are there any other proponents? Are there any opponents? The public hearing is closed. Roll call.
Melton. Pauls. Palermo. Festerson. Gray. Mr. President,
Yes.
motion passed 6-0. Item 11, to consider special designated licenses for the Broke Down Palace located at 8808 Maple Street for concerts on October 1st from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. and October 2nd through October 4th from 10 a.m. to 2 a.m. with music until 1 a.m. each night.
The public hearing on item 11 begins at this time. Are there any proponents?
My name is Ross Coley, address 8805 Maple Street, Omaha.
Thank you. Are there any other proponents? Are there any opponents? The public hearing is closed. Councilmember Festerson, you're recognized.
Thanks, Mr. President. Mr. Coley, just a couple of questions for
Sure.
you. So we have a couple of events you're working on, right? Do you want to describe those a little bit?
It's going to be one full event. So 3-day festival concert. We call it Run for the Roses. So this was originally scheduled for the first weekend in May. Obviously, we postponed that due to COVID concerns. Now we feel comfortable in our ability to safely launch this concert weekend.
Okay. And so we're multiple nights, and typically the council would have a rule of midnight for music, but this is requesting 1. I've never had any complaints about what you're doing or any issues, so I think I'm okay with that. But do you want to describe how you'll handle that?
Yeah, so I think we'd like to get cleared for 1 o'clock, although we are considering moving our last shows indoors to our brick and mortar establishment, which is adjacent to the area that we're looking to expand to. There's only 3 residences, I believe, within 150 yards of our business. So we've talked to our neighbors about it. So we'd like to just have the ability to run late in case our 12 o'clock band runs till 12:15, 12:30 if there's an encore, kind of that situation. So.
Okay. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that you reached out to the neighborhood there. It is kind of in the back, and there's an elevation there. Which
Yeah,
makes
there's
it,
a natural kind of bluff that separates that. So the back of our stage will back up to that and then face north. So that's just all parking lot area till 90th Street. And then we have 2 other neighbors that are in our industrial block, if you would call it. One of them is a breakfast diner that's open from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. They're going to do some food for that event. And then the other one's a laundromat. So I don't think it's going to conflict with our other neighbors and our business neighbors, I should say. So.
Yeah, good, thanks. I'm glad you kind of thought these things through. Looks like you've done a good job. And I'd motion to approve.
Roll call.
Melton. Pauls. Palermo. Festerson.
Yes.
Gray. Mr. President,
Yes.
motion passed 6-0.
Thank you.
Consent agenda. Any member of the city council may cause any item placed on the consent agenda to be removed. Items removed from the consent agenda shall be taken up by the city council immediately following the consent agenda in the order in which they were removed, unless otherwise provided by the city council rules of order.
The public hearing on agenda items 12 through 14 were held on September 1, 2020. Roll call.
Melton. Pauls. Palermo. Festerson. Gray. Mr. President,
Yes.
motion passed 6-0.
The public hearings on agenda items 15 through 42 are today. If you wish to address the city council regarding any of these items, please come to the microphone, indicate the agenda item number you wish to address, identify yourself by your name, address, who you represent, and if you are a proponent or opponent.
Number 16, Lee Myers, 105 South 9th Street, opposed.
Okay, would you like to add anything? You have up to 3 minutes.
Sure, right now?
Yes.
If you wonder why government doesn't work, here is the best little example I know. If a truck needs a 12-foot lane to go through Holdridge at 45 miles an hour, that same 12-foot lane is put into Benson on Maple Street. And if there's one thing that's difficult about designing streets in Omaha, it's lane widths. This is the obscure little committee that makes that possible for the Omaha Public Works to use the excuse of, well, we have to have a 12-foot lane because that's what the state requires. By the state, they mean this little obscure Nebraska Board of Public Roads Classifications and Standards. They're the ones that say 12-foot lanes is what truck needs to go down Maple Street, to go down 30th Street in Florence, to go down South 13th Street in Omaha. So that's why we have 12-foot lanes, even in Highlander, in North Omaha, where you read there's this huge wide 12-foot lane and a teeny little bike lane. Why? Because this Nebraska Board of Public says that 12-foot lanes are standard. Well, you're giving your main design feature about complete streets over to this little committee that has no reason or no business designing Omaha streets, but yet it's part of the old Department of Roads, but it's not part of the Department of, it's obscure, stupid little committee, and we in the city of Omaha turn over our lane widths to them because of this agreement. It's a stupid agreement, and the Omaha should design its own streets.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to testify on the consent agenda resolutions?
If I move these, will they start making noise? I want to make sure everyone can hear me clearly.
You can be heard. We hear you.
Okay. My name is Linnell Quinn. I reside at 111 EARNEST Jackson Street. Have anyone heard of that street before? No? Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's EARNEST Jackson. About 21 years ago, a young man was arrested by them.
What,
yeah, a young man was arrested.
What agenda item are you speaking?
13. I am speaking on the regards of, I'm also here in representation of the Freedom of Ernest Jackson movement.
No,
Kind of
you're not on.
relate to.
We're on agenda items 15 through 42.
I'm sorry, yeah, 15. I'm sorry. Okay.
That's a manager application.
Yeah,
for a liquor
okay.
license.
And I just wanted to just bring the city aware, I'm just going to be really quickly,
You're out
of
of-
Ernest
sir, you're
Jackson,
out of order.
who has been in prison for 20 years.
Thank
That has
you, but you're
nothing,
gonna have
that
to
had
take a
nothing
seat.
with his case
Thank
was,
you.
yeah, he was arrested 20 years ago for a crime he didn't commit. I don't know if you have heard of Ernest Jackson. Freedom.
Anyone else on the consent agenda resolutions? 15 through 42.
5015 Lafayette Avenue, Omaha 68132. I am generally opposed to 33, 34, 37, 39, 40, and 44. On items number 33 and 34, I don't think there's enough information out there. I think the public needs to know who's going to benefit from the construction and sale of these properties, whatever's going to be built. Will they be paying market rate for rents or market rate for a house? In terms of temporary housing for homeless, apparently we are following through the cracks on that recently. I did comment about a man that I met 2 weeks ago here that was waiting for help from the city. The city finally came through, but only because city employee in the Human Relations Department actually spent his own time, 6 hours, plus had money out of his pocket. And this wasn't happened over one day. This happened over a number of weeks, apparently. But I commend that employee. He had a couple of employees that worked for him also. But he himself had to go out. Picked the guy up off the street, slept in the bushes because the Salvation Army wouldn't take him in. A couple of the other temporary housing places apparently had kicked him out. I don't know the details, whether they were just out of money, out of room, or what. But I spent 2 days with this gentleman, and there was never a problem.
What's that have to do?
All right,
with-
on number 37, 39. Excuse me, I'll just jump to 42. Benson Theater. That place has been in and out of a number of hands trying to do entertainment, food, drink, and I don't know why all of a sudden I drove by there. It's just a shell. The overall building is there, but everything inside is gone. Taxpayers are footing the bill for that. I'm against it. If they want to do adult theaters or entertainment theaters or theaters like the Buffett Theater, film streams, then they should pay for it. Number 44.
44?
Number 44.
Well, we're not there. Up to 42 at this point.
Oops.
Benson Theater was number 40.
All right. Emergency shelters. I think I mentioned that we've apparently fallen through on that, so I'll skip to OYS. Yes, it is obvious that we need new programs for the youth that are incarcerated. But as I pointed out to the Douglas County Youth Meeting upstairs on the 9th floor,
What agenda item, Larry?
Omaha Youth and Emergency Services. I'm against it. The reason is I think our public school systems have failed us. We ought to be reinforcing and spending the money on the school systems to stop the problems before they occur.
Your time's expired.
And
Thank you.
again-
Councilman, is there anyone else wishing to testify on the consent agenda resolutions? Public hearing is closed. Councilmember Festerson, you're recognized.
Thanks, Mr. President. Just comments on 2 items here. I am in support of item number 40, which is the Benson Theater. We have representatives here who don't need to speak today. They've been before us before, but it is a great project for downtown Benson, and it is primarily funded by philanthropy, a multi-million-dollar renovation of a great building there, and worthy of historic credits, which is the item on the agenda here today. The second item, I would go back to item number 16, since we did have testimony on that here today. I see we have Mr. Stubbe in the back, if he's willing and able to come down on that item. Only because I did sense the frustration in Mr. Meyer's voice there on some of these standards, and I have to say that I've encountered some of that frustration myself as we've done some pretty heavy workarounds as we went through renovations of historic business districts in Florence and Benson that had a lot of limitations based on some state highway standards. So if you could just talk a little bit more about number 16. I don't think we really went through that in Public Works Committee or anything.
We have not, and again, this is Bob Stubbe, Public Works, excuse me. This is essentially establishes that we, as a city, are agreeing to comply with state law. And so the state establishes standards when it comes to all different types of roads, whether it's a park road, a local road, an arterial road, or an interstate system. There's certain standards when it comes to lane widths, shoulder widths, grades, speeds, all those types of things. Also, if you look at the document, it also essentially establishes the fact that when we get state gas tax money, we're supposed to utilize those funds for things that are related to the transportation network. This is kind of a standard operating for us from the perspective of essentially agreeing to comply with those state laws.
And so how frequently are we asked to confirm or approve these certifications by the board?
If I'm not mistaken, I believe it's an annual basis, yes.
And that's a requirement based on state law and state funding?
That is correct. It's a requirement based on state law.
And is there in fact a board, I'm not aware of who's on the board who would establish these classifications. I assume it's appointed and there's engineers and...
Yeah, correct. There is a state board that I believe is appointed by the governor for members to sit on that state board. In fact, I know one of the individuals that I believe he currently serves on the state board was the city engineer for the city of Lincoln. As far as the number of individuals on that particular board, I don't have that information right with me, but I can provide that information if you'd like.
And do we ever have any impact or influence on how they establish these up front, realizing that we've had some frustration with dealing with them at the local level?
Well, I believe anything from the standpoint of compliance with state law, there's a process that they go to. I believe that we also have the ability to ask for waivers, which we've done in the past. Majority of the time, it's very limited basis, but we have asked for waivers when it comes to grade, because there are certain situations where grade is established, and to essentially not comply with the grade, there'd be a significant expense to a developer or the city or whatever. So those are the types of waivers that we've asked for in the past.
And do you know if this board ever, do they have like public meetings and any kind of public testimony on these items?
To the best of my knowledge, they do. In fact, I believe that they just recently went through an upgrade or a change to some of the standards when they call it a 3R, which is reconstruction, resurfacing, and repairs associated with standard types of streets, as they indicated previously.
Is there a timeline or an urgency to this being approved today, or what's that entail?
I have Heather Tippy Pierce shaking her head up and down, yes.
Okay, come on up, Heather, if you want to address that.
Heather Tippy Pierce, Public Works. This is a two-part compliance with state statutes. So the first piece is what's before you today. This must be completed and returned to the Department of Transportation no later than, I believe it's October 15th or October 31st. So there is a little bit of time, but definitely a time limit as to when we can complete this and maintain compliance. The other aspect of that then is our annual financial certification, and that has to be completed by December 31st. So you'll be seeing that soon.
Okay. And so there really, right now, is not, from their perspective, the state board's perspective, it is what it is. Either a locality adopts it or doesn't adopt it at this point in the year.
And this particular certification is not adopting any standards. This is just basically a ratification by the city saying we are complying with the statutes. And then the other part, and the statutory requirements for how we spend the money that we get. Then the other part of that is that financial certification that says, yes, we're doing the right audits and whatnot. So they're just a one-page form saying we are complying with the statutes. It's not having to do with the details of the statutes themselves.
Okay, so this is procedural today.
Correct.
But I would be interested in this conversation in an ongoing way, perhaps best in our Public Works Committee, maybe in our next meeting, Mr. Chairman, to kind of go through this in more detail and see how we can't influence this up front. Maybe next time, realizing there has been some frustration with standards we aren't always able to get waivers from, or that we have to comply with every project. Is that a reasonable request, Mr. Stubbe?
That's a reasonable request.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Festerson. I would add too, while it's nice that the Farnham Street in Blackstone has been resurfaced, it's been resurfaced at these other wide lane paint markings. And the people who have spent hundreds of millions of dollars redeveloping the Blackstone district and creating hundreds of new jobs have been advocating and in some cases now knocking their heads against the wall in frustration that everything they're doing to make this more pedestrian friendly now, because of the wide painted lanes, perpetuates this sense that the driver has that they're on a freeway and to accelerate. In many cases, they don't even know they're doing it. It's just the feeling subconsciously that a driver gets when they're in extra wide lanes. They think they're on an interstate or a parkway or something like that. So in terms of my district too, it's not just an emerging issue, it's been an issue that is one of great concern as we try to implement a more pedestrian and bike-friendly community. So I'm looking forward to the Public Works Committee taking this on. Mr. Pauls, you're recognized.
There's one way to solve some of these problems is, number one, at the legislature. Those individuals who are appointed to those committees or those groups go in front of the government committee. If there are people who would go down there and say, hey, what actually is the background of this person? They're vetted. The governor nominates, and then the legislature takes a look at them. So there's one way of doing that. So if you have a concern about that, look at those individuals who are being assigned to those particular groups. And number two, if you want to change some of the rules that we're talking about, some of the statutes, there's a committee down there called Transportation. That's where the city ought to be taking some of their bills to say, we need to take a look at this. It'll be a long, hard fight, but that's where it all starts. And we just sort of flow along with it because that's what we're given. But we can make some of our impressions much earlier in the game. Right now, it's almost too late. Thank you.
Thank you. No further lights. Is there a motion? Roll call.
Melton. Yes. Pauls. Yes. Palermo. Yes. Festerson. Gray. Yes. Mr. President.
Yes.
Motion passed 6-0. Item 43, an ordinance to authorize and issue sanitary sewerage system revenue refunding bond, Series 2020, in the amount of $300 million. A's amendment of the whole.
The public hearing on item 40.
No public hearing,
Nope.
just vote.
Okay, so we've had the public hearing, September 1. So on the amendment of the whole? On the amendment of the whole. Roll call.
Melton. Yes. Pauls. Yes. Palermo. Yes. Festerson. Yes. Gray. Yes. Mr. President.
Yes.
Motion passed 6-0. Item 44, an ordinance to approve the fiscal year 2020-2021 Douglas County Board of Commissioners Visitor Improvement Fund Grant in the amount of $68,200 to further develop and improve the Omaha the Troll attraction.
The public hearing on item 44 begins at this time. Are there any proponents?
Deborah Ward, Omaha Convention and Visitors Bureau, 1620 Dodge, here to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any other proponents?
Scott Blake, 2316 North 52nd Street, Beats District. I feel uniquely qualified to speak on this ordinance. I'm an artist. I've been involved in several public art projects in Omaha, and I've even worked with the Visitors Bureau last year at the bus convention in Louisville. I also worked with the Papio Natural Resources District to install bicycle fix-it stations in Omaha, and I helped install one at the base of the Bob Carey pedestrian bridge last month. So when I saw Omar's ordinance was on second reading and the public hearing was today, I had to speak up. Those who come to visit Omar often do not have a clue what the troll is about and how he came to live under the Bob. So let me tell you a little about Omar the troll. Omar is bringing different races, ethnicities, and ages together. Omar is building inclusivity in classrooms. Omar is relatable and is not of a specific race, ethnicity, or age. And that was all taken from the attachment on file. I will point out there's a continuity error on page 2 of the application where it says Omar is in his late 30s. I just hope the kids using the Omar filter on Snapchat don't find out his real age. That would be a bummer. Let me get back on topic. I got a quote from Council President Jerem. You said in 2019, quote, "We are a car-centric city, and we continue to have policies that promote cars," end quote. I cannot think of a better way to promote this car-centric city than by giving a fictional character a walking stick. But $10,000 for an authentic troll walking stick is not enough. I noticed in the recent budget on page 371 that Mayor Stothert reduced the number of maintained crosswalks. And that is in line with what Public Works keeps telling us, that pedestrian crosswalks give people a false sense of security. So what I'm suggesting is take some of the money from defunding the crosswalks and give Omar the troll a better walking stick. A proper troll walking stick is usually made of high quality wood like mahogany, ebony, or teak, and it is usually fitted with gold accents as well as jewels. The current design looks like a stick found floating down the river. How is a generic looking walking stick going to help with diversity and inclusion in Douglas County? And I know the Omaha Convention and Visitors Bureau is requesting an additional $65,000 for a virtual story about the new walking stick, but I think the City Council could do more for Omar the troll, especially during a pandemic. In closing, I see a lot of people wearing a thin blue line mask. Omar is blue. He appreciates that. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any other proponents? Are there any opponents? The public hearing is closed.
Item 45, MC Wells Contracting LLC appeals rejection of their bid from August 19th, 2020 for the sanitary sewer crossing replacement at I-680 in Spalding Plaza project.
Is there anyone here from MC Wells? Okay, please come down and give us your name, address, and the basis for your appeal.
Rob Wells, part owner of MC Wells. My address is 21805 H Street in Elkhorn. I guess our basis for our appeal is that it was our intention to use Divine Mowing Services, also known as DMS, to meet the requirements of the contract for the Small Emerging Business Program. There was a minor clerical error on our bid. We put landscaping when they're listed as heavy civil and other, which is what we intend to use them for. We intend to use them to help us mostly with hauling of trees and debris and removals on that project, and any other negotiated work that we feel that we can use them for to help us surpass that 5% goal. In addition, we ourselves have submitted for the Small Emerging Business Program. Our paperwork was just submitted actually this morning. But you know, we're a pretty new startup business ourselves, and we're trying to grow into that program as well. So happy to answer any questions anybody has.
Thank you. We'll ask Heather Tippy Pierce to come up and give the city side of this. Stick around if you don't mind in case anyone has questions.
Heather Tippy Pierce, Public Works. And I have a couple.
Yeah, you just lift it up.
Just lift it up, okay.
And then all the way up.
It's all new since I've been down here last.
Well, welcome back. Face up just like the old one. And then you focus it on top if you want to zoom in or out.
Okay. So this is the exhibit that MC Wells submitted with their bid. It clearly indicates that DMS landscaping is to be utilized for specific scopes that fall under the NAICS code 561730, that's landscaping services. At the time of the bid, and I believe still at this time, Divine Mowing Services is not registered as a small or emerging small business for these scopes of work. So we kind of took a look at the appeal and the basis that Mr. Wells says that he intends to actually use them, that this was a clerical error. The majority of these items are falling under landscaping services as well as highway, bridge, and specialty items. There is dirt trucking here, 484220, which is heavy and other civil. That is what DMS is registered for, but in absence of clear information at the time of bid, and for the sake of consistency in how we evaluate the bid, we had to go based on what was submitted at the time of bid. None of this information that was provided in the appeal was provided at the time of bid. This was all that was provided. And so for that reason, we had to assume that the full 5.4% was solely going to be conducted in this NAICS code, which DMS is not certified for. Therefore, the bid could not be accepted as responsive and was rejected because it did not meet the 5% reserve requirements that the city put on this contract. So we recommend that his appeal be denied and we move forward with the bid.
Thank you. Mr. Wells, is there anything you wanted to say in rebuttal to that? I'll give you a minute if you want to. Otherwise, we'll just open it up to council members.
I would just say that it's a little bit hard to understand how when we would be using them for hauling dirt, trucking, how that would fall under heavy civil and other. I understand that we put clearing and grubbing. It's a function of the bid item that we intend to use them for. Again, it's primarily trucking that we intend to use them for, which if that falls under heavy civil and other for dirt, I would assume that it would for clearing and grubbing as well. I understand that at the time of bid, it wasn't probably clear. Like I said, it was a clerical error. Had we put heavy civil and other in that instead of clearing and grubbing, this would all be a non-issue. So I guess it was our hopes and appeal that we're a small emerging, going through the process of being a small emerging business ourselves, and we had contacted one and had every intention under the program to use them, that be taken into consideration.
Thank you. And we understand you're new and you're learning, and this is not something uncommon to other people who've come before us. And while I suspect that the outcome of this, while I don't know for sure yet how the vote will be as we do in other cases, because if there were compliant bidders at the time of the submission and we were to grant this appeal, then we open up the city for potential lawsuits by those who were fully compliant. And but in any event, while I've been talking, there's been a light that's gone on. So let's hear now from Councilmember Vice President Palermo.
Thank you, Mr. President. No questions for you right now, sir.
Sure.
But Mrs. Heather Tippy Pierce, if you could, please. I need some clarification on what was submitted originally, that first picture you had up with the sticky note on it.
Sure. Heather Tippy Pierce, Public Works. I'm showing you a copy of the small and emerging small business disclosure form that was submitted as part of MC Wells's bid.
So that was originally submitted as part of the sealed bid?
Right.
Okay. And the 6-digit number is what that part of the bid would apply for?
So that's correct. We utilize, per the ordinance, the North American Industrial Classification System, or NAICS code system, to represent the the different scopes of work that these businesses can be registered under. And HR&R works with the ordinance to determine where those thresholds are and reviews that as a part of the firm's application process. DMS is currently only registered under other heavy and civil engineering construction. So that's NAICS code 237990, which there's a whole website that you can go to understand what these codes are supposed to represent. Prior to me going on maternity leave a couple of years ago, I created a cheat sheet of some of the and this is in pencil, so I don't know how great it's gonna read, but okay, there we go. So I went through with my team so that we were consistently from bid to bid to bid reading these scopes the same. And so you can clearly see, there are various different codes that we typically see on public works contracts that we consider for reserves. Items such as clearing, grubbing, seeding, and erosion control clearly fall under landscaping services as defined by the North American Industrial Classification System. So for consistency purposes, that's how we always read those scopes of work, is under 561730. And DMS is not certified under that code.
Okay, thank you for that. And the other piece of paper you had, I think you had detailed on, you had wrote out 4 different classification numbers.
So this is the appeal.
Yes.
And so as we walk through various scopes of work, what we could consider NAICS codes for, 237990, I think it was, other heavy and civil. We can look at that for construction entrances, or we can look at 238990, but that was not identified at the time of bid. And as we've heard many, many times before, and as this council has ruled for consistency's sake, to be compliant with the ordinance, we need to know what you're doing at the time of bid. So this was just a reading based on the appeal. And so to help understand kind of what Mr. Wells was talking about in relation to the NAICS codes and make sure that we hadn't missed anything, I went through and I did that evaluation. But these qualifying codes were not on the bid.
So then is it fair to say if the SEB that was originally up there fell in line with one of these other codes, and then whoever it was that got the bid, they could still use them for other different codes along the project, but the original bid has to be lined up for what it calls for? So how do we, and part 2 of that is if we have a contractor hire SEB and they do more than one service, who is regulating that they only do that one service on that contract?
So to meet the minimum requirement for this contract, you had to have at least 5% of your total base bid be performed in scopes under a certified SEB. So MC Wells could have picked any number of scopes as long as the firms were certified in those scopes of work to meet that minimum 5%. In addition, as they go into the contract, if they want to utilize them for additional scopes, that's fine, but you have to identify at least the floor at the time of bid. And that was not identified on the bid that was submitted to us.
So at the time of bid, as long as they have the right classification and SEB in place, even after they're awarded the bid and granted the money, they could move forward with hiring whoever they wanted to complete the work.
No, per the terms of the ordinance, they have to utilize that company for that scope of work at least that price that they've identified. Otherwise, they're not in compliance. And that is handled through an appeals process with HR&R. For the purposes of awarding a bid, when we set an SEB reserve, we have to have, as identified with the bid documents, a compliant disclosure form. which we did not have here today.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Palermo. Councilmember Gray, you're recognized.
Yeah, just for further clarification too, Mr. Vice President, the other thing that happens under this ordinance is if a prime contractor were to let go of a sub for whatever that reason might be, they have to state to the city in writing why they're doing that, number one. And number two, they have to have a replacement. And that's per the ordinance.
Thank you,
Mr. President.
Councilmember Gray. No further lights. What's the pleasure of the council?
Can I ask one quick question?
Come on back up, identify yourself and again.
Rob Wells, MC Wells.
And if you're asking a question, the council does not have to entertain questions.
No,
Go ahead and ask your question.
Real brief question for Ms. Tippy Pierce. Are those NAICS codes listed on the actual sheet online for the, okay.
Okay. That,
Yes, I mean, it gives the codes, but it gives no explanation of the codes other than it says heavy civil and others. So I go back to, it's a minor clerical error that, you know, at 11 o'clock the night before a bid, I wrote down the wrong, I should have put heavy civil and other. It was our intention to use them for such. And I guess, you know, I go back to it's a clerical error. It was not, you know, it was our intent to follow the rule and the letter and the spirit of the program.
we understand. Thank you, Mr. Wells. What's the pleasure of the council? Second, roll call.
Melton. Pauls. Palermo. Festerson. Gray. Mr. President.
Yes.
Motion passed 6-0. Non-action items, items 46 through 63, do not require public hearing or city council consideration at this meeting, but will be placed on a future agenda for public hearing and/or vote. The reason for non-action is noted after the item on the agenda, as well as the date the item is expected to appear on an agenda for consideration.
Roll call.
Melton. Pauls. Palermo. Festerson. Gray. Mr. President. Motion passed 6-0. Meeting is adjourned at 2:56.